Thank you very much, Alan. Well, is everybody all rested up? Okay. We're near the finish here, so hang in there. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who I have known for a long time. Don't ask for clarity on long time. And I consider him both a professional associate and a personal friend. I have the utmost respect for what he and his company has done. They have developed just a wonderful, wonderful project management critical change solution that we have used in our company to help clients in small and large and very, very large organizations. And he's pioneering some innovation in my eyes with the use of critical chain and project management. I think he's doing things that no other project management software out there can do. And with that, I will introduce Sanjeev Gupta, the Chief Executive Officer of Realization Technologies.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming here. And just to set the expectations right, I want to make sure you understand that what I'm going to present might be very familiar to you already. There's not much groundbreaking things in this presentation. But the topic definitely is one of primary interest to us, having been involved in TOC implementations for the last 10 years or so in about 200 companies, 200 different environments. The issue of local measurements always comes up in some form or another. When it was DBR, the issue was, we are saying don't measure local efficiency, then what do we measure? So that question always came up. Similarly, in projects, the question comes up, don't turn estimates into commitments at the task level. Then how do you measure the local performance? And we are already very familiar with the problem. At the end of the day, if you are managing an organization, you do need local measurements. Just system level measurements are not going to cut it, because you want to know, if you are managing a plant, you want to know how each area in the plant is contributing to the overall goals. Then what you also want to know is, again, if you are managing a plant, you want to know when things are going wrong before the fact, so that before throughput is hurt, before the customer suffers, to be able to make proactive course corrections. And the third piece, which has been emphasized in this conference especially, is the whole area of how do you find out which areas need improvement, and how do you prioritize the improvement efforts. So for example, you can find out which areas need improvements, and then you come up with some investment money that you need to be able to effect those improvements. Then how do you prioritize the improvement efforts? We also know that local measurements can be counterproductive. And bottom line is, the moment you introduce local measurements, how do you make sure that people don't start optimizing locally at the expense of the global good? So we all know that. So there's nothing new there. We also know the examples of bad local optimization. In projects, it is hidden safeties within the tasks. In the supply chain, it is excess inventory. In the sales situations, it could be inflated forecasts or very heavy discounting towards the end of a period, or end of a year, end of a quarter, whatever. So these are the problems you want to be able to avoid as you solve the measurements problem. And just as a reminder, T, I, and OE are great measurements, but they are not local measurements. They do make it easier for people to understand the impact of local actions, but they still are not local measurements. So what we are really after is local measurements. As I said, there is nothing new to report. So what we found was, as we surveyed all the stuff that has been published or written or spoken about measurements, so basically our conclusion is that all the necessary concepts have been defined. Unfortunately, they just have not been put into practice as widely. And only when you start putting these concepts into practice will you find the refinements to the concepts that are already there. The second question for us was, how much of these measurements can be computerized? And over there we came up with an interesting answer, that if you try to computerize measurements fully, the only measurements that you can computerize fully are bad local measurements. Any local measurements that are good cannot be fully computerized. Let me repeat that. If you look at cost accounting, for example, or traditional management practices, you can measure efficiency at the lowest levels and just keep rolling it up to the up and up and up, and you have local measurements floating all the way to the top. But we know that is not a good local measurement. So good local measurements cannot be fully computerized. And the reason is the same, that just like management cannot be fully computerized, managers cannot be fully replaced with computers. You can use computers to aid management, to make management more effective. For the same reason, measurements, local measurements, cannot be fully computerized. Computers can be used to assist in local measurements. So, and what I want to do is walk you through the logic of this conclusion and ask for your feedback. The issue, of course, is that what makes the local measurements problem so difficult is the whole issue of variability and uncertainties. If we had a perfect world, no variability, the local measurements problem would not exist. Basically, if there was no uncertainty, no variability, you would define the global goals, you will define the interactions within the system, run an optimization program, come up with what every part of the system is supposed to do, issue those instructions to people, and that is your measurement. But because of Murphy, we know that optimization doesn't work. So the primary issue, primary problem that TOC is able to solve for us is how do you come up with good, effective local instructions in the face of uncertainty and variabilities. And the key to local measurements is, again, the key to management, which is subordination. How do you do good, effective subordination? And there are 3 components to subordination, 2 of which we have already known, and the third one which has been, again, emphasized heavily in this conference, which is the subordination logic. For example, when you are running a plant, having a routing and a bill of materials and the explosion logic, that is the subordination logic. It can take your master schedule and explode it down to the work center level or to the materials. In projects, the network, project PERT network, and the explosion logic of the project PERT network is the subordination logic. So what the subordination logic does is it takes whatever master schedule you create, if you will, in a production and projects environment and derives local instructions from it. And this is not sufficient because of uncertainties. That is where buffer management comes in. What buffer management does is that if these subordination instructions, you want people to follow them, you want them to be usable in the face of uncertainties. So this is also the second big contribution of TOC, right? Because what TOC is doing is, for the first time, it is allowing you to subordinate to the right things and also have effective or robust subordination in the face of uncertainties. That is the problem in my mind that TOC is solving. So the buffer management is the second essential aspect of measurements. And the third piece which we have heard is buffer diagnostics, which is, as you are in the process of execution, as you are trying to subordinate to the plan that you created, you can record the obstacles to subordination, and that becomes the way to find which areas need improvements and prioritize the improvement efforts. And I will illustrate this using the example of production. So what I'm assuming here is that drum buffer rope is in place. So you are using drum buffer rope to create a master schedule and to control the release of materials into the shop. Once those conditions are satisfied, then what? We know that if we start tracking the status of the shipping buffer, for example, that is measuring subordination, but it is not measuring the local contribution to subordination. So when you look at the shipping buffer of an order, what it is telling you is what is the net effect of all the things that have gone on in the plant on the overall throughput of the plant. But it's not telling you what was the contribution to that buffer of the individual local areas. For that, you need to go a level down. And what we are saying over there is very simple. Again, caveat being that if you are controlling the release of materials, then tracking work in process inventory is a good enough measurement of subordination. Because if work in process is piling up, what that means is that the material that was released to satisfy a throughput need, that material is not flowing. That means throughput is getting blocked. That means there is a problem in subordination. So if work in process starts growing, that means there is a problem in subordination. Also, what you could do is you can measure this work in process in many different ways. And you can measure it in terms of throughput dollars, you can measure it in terms of hours of work. Our instinct is to keep it simple because of the point that I will emphasize later, that all these things might add a level of precision that might be useless in the face of uncertainties anyway. And you can even convert this into an advanced metric, which is if you are measuring throughput dollars, you can multiply it by the days of buffer consumed. You end up with throughput dollar days. Or you can use something very simple. How much of the work in process is red, yellow, green, and all you need is to be able to observe whether the red portion is increasing, yellow portion is going down, total WIP is increasing, total WIP is going down. That should be good enough. And again, the reason we are suggesting that is we are saying that you cannot fully automate or computerize the local measurements. What managers need is the first indication of whether a local area is contributing effectively or not. Then they need to apply their intuition and judgment to drill further down. And that is the measurement. So this is what we are suggesting in the context of drum buffer rope as a good enough measurement of subordination. Is good subordination happening or not? Let's see if it meets the goals, meets the criteria. Does this measure the local contribution to the overall goal? Assuming again that you have used DVR to create a master schedule and to release the materials. If work in process starts piling up, you know throughput is getting hurt. Right? And I forgot what the first criteria was, let me just bring it up. Does it provide alerts for proactive course corrections? Definitely buffer consumption does, but does work in process piling up or the red portion of work in process going up, does it provide proactive alerts? Okay? And but it does not meet the third criteria, which is pinpointing the need for improvement needs. Okay. So let's look at what that is. And again, this logic also has been explained in detail by Ellie, by Alex Knight, who has implemented this in the hospitals. And essentially what we are saying is, whenever there is work in front of you and the work in process starts piling up, and you cannot process it because you are waiting for something, you need to capture the waiting codes. So whenever work is put on hold, just capture the reason codes. And do the Pareto analysis based on the buffer impact of those reason codes. And that is going to tell you which are the areas for improvement. And if in this case, let's say there are two reasons that have a big impact on the buffer, but this one takes only $5 of investment, and this one takes $5 million of investment to improve. Then of course, this one is the one that you will go and solve first. And the recommendation, of course, is given that in subordination you are dealing with lots of people mostly, you want to standardize things. If you standardize the weighting codes, it will make the analysis easy. And of course, the weighting codes can be continually refined. So after 1 week, you can go and change the standard list of weighting codes. The following week, you can go in again and change that again. So this is the second part, which is this piece gives you meets the third criteria for local measurements, which is pinpointing the areas where improvements need to be made. And in projects, it's the same general solution. The same concept in our mind works in projects, except that the way you calculate buffers and whether buffers are red, yellow, or green are different. You know that. And the reason they are different is because activity dependencies are very important in projects. In production, they are not. I've reversed the graph a little bit just to compare it with production. Right? And for the same reason, buffer diagnostics are different. The logic of buffer diagnostics is different, but the principles are the same. What we are again after is what is the impact on buffer of local disruptions. In projects, the second piece that is very tricky is measurement of work in process. Because especially if you are in new product development, you are developing products for the future, how do you really get reasonable numbers for throughput dollars? You can't. Similarly, hours of work, that is a measurement. We know that task estimates can vary widely, so that can be easily gained. Our experience is that you should be able to use the number of tasks that are piling up. And if you have an established process for creating project plans, this is a good enough measurement. Again, as a manager, what I am after is what is the trend of flow. Is work in process increasing or going down? Any questions so far before I move to the second piece? Go ahead. Okay. Yes, Mary.
You meant the number of active tasks by the last measurement.
Very good. So the question is, when you are measuring the number of tasks, what we are talking about is if you are exercising release control over the release of projects, then what you are measuring is all the tasks that are piling up. So the next question, once we got clarity on these measurements, and by the way, all this stuff has been written about. The first time that the earliest I can trace it is in two references. One is the haystack syndrome, and there is a book called Essays on Theory of Constraints, the very first chapter. So what is the role of information technology? We know that the power of information technology is in being able to collect lots of data, process lots of data, and distribute lots of data very quickly and efficiently. So it is clear that definitely information technology can help. First of all, in issuing subordination instructions, in doing the calculations and communicating them. Same thing in buffer management, and same thing in buffer diagnostics. So for example, if I get stuck, if I have a computer screen I can go into and record the waiting codes, that makes the life easy. But you cannot rely on numbers alone. And this is, I think, an important point, which is because we have uncertainties and variability, many a times a local disruption can be an effect of uncertainty and variability that happened there or happened somewhere else, or it could be non-performance. So managers need to have a keen sense of what is non-performance and what is the effect of uncertainty and variability. Managers need to be able to make that distinction. You just cannot look at a computer report and give people bonuses based on those numbers. Managers are needed because uncertainties are there. The second reason managers are needed is that even when you are trying to issue the instructions the first time around, you cannot convert all human intuition and judgment into bits and bytes. We'll give you an example. In projects, the best the computer can do for you is it can give you a list of tasks that you need to work on and the order in which you need to work on. But it cannot tell you whether Bob is the best person to assign to this task or is Joe the best person to assign to the task. But that is something that the manager knows and will know only when the task comes to them. You really cannot use computers to define that logic and automate it. Similarly, in production, we do need to save some setups on the non-constraints, but you really can't capture that logic into the computer. That is a decision that you will make based on the reality of events as they are unfolding. So because you cannot capture all human intuition and judgment into bits and bytes, and because you need to distinguish between variability or effects of variability and non-performance, management is essential. So these are the three key points then. Subordination plus buffer management, not optimization. replace efficiency with a notion of flow, and computer aided, not computerized. Okay, so one last slide I want to just walk through in terms of putting these measurements in the overall context. So of course, we know the process. There is a planning process which ends with issuing subordination instructions. Execution is about enforcing the instructions and keeping the instructions current. And improvement is about prioritizing and pursuing improvement opportunities. And the local measurements we have talked about apply in this area and this area. So in this overall framework, what we are kind of saying is that these are the measurements. The measurement of planning is at the end of the plan, how much throughput, what does the plan say in terms of throughput, inventory, and operating expense? The better you do on that, the better, more careful plans you have drawn up. The second piece, which again I have picked up from various conversations with Ellie or things that he says, is the notion of safety net. Because if there is for example, you create a production plan, and you know that this production plan is contingent upon this raw material, which you can get from only one source of supply in the world. That means throughput, inventory, and operating expense are not enough. You need to either provide some kind of a safety net or provide an indication what the risk is. And in execution, buffer status, flow, same things. Buffer status at the aggregate level, flow is at the local level. And on this side, what you're talking about is impact on the buffer, and in case some money decisions are involved in funding these improvement efforts, then you again need to convert that to throughput, inventory, and operating expense. Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful.